Hello, and welcome back to Creepy Chronicles. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy Creepy Chronicles filled with spine-chilling horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story one, it was late at night, and a cold fog had settled over everything. The streets were empty, the kind of empty that makes you feel like you are the last person left on Earth. I was driving through a long, deserted road with nothing but darkness on either side when the thirst hit me all at once. It was the kind of thirst that scratches at your throat and makes it hard to think about anything else. I pulled out my phone and opened the map, and after a few seconds of searching, it showed me a mart not too far from where I was. I figured it would be a quick stop, just a drink and back on the road. Nothing more than that. So I turned the car around and headed toward it. The mart came into view after a couple of minutes, and from the outside it looked open. The lights were on inside, but everything about it felt a little off. There were no other cars in the parking lot, no people walking in or out. The sign above the entrance was flickering slightly, and the fog clung to the glass doors like it was trying to look inside. I told myself I was just tired and that I was reading too much into nothing. I parked, got out, and pushed through the front doors. Inside, it was completely silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence you get late at night in a store where the music is off and nobody is around. This was a heavier kind of silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of every little sound your own body makes. My shoes squeaked against the floor with every step, and it felt embarrassingly loud. I looked around, and the store seemed to stretch on in all directions with shelves stacked high, but I could not see another customer anywhere. The whole place was empty except for one person, a cashier sitting behind the counter near the entrance. He had a book open in front of him and was completely buried in it, his head tilted down so far that I could not see his face at all, not even a little bit. Just the top of his head and the pages of the book. I walked up to the counter and cleared my throat. He did not move. I tried again and finally asked him where the soda section was. He answered without lifting his head, without even a pause in whatever he was reading. Just one word. Upstairs. That was it. No pointing, no further explanation, nothing. I waited for a second, thinking he might add something, but he had already gone back to being completely absorbed in his book. So I turned and went looking for the stairs. I found them toward the back of the store and headed up to the first floor. I walked the whole thing slowly, checking every aisle, but there was no soda anywhere. Just snacks and cleaning products and some things I did not recognize. I went up to the second floor and did the same thing, going aisle by aisle, but still nothing. No drinks, no soda, no refrigerated section. I was starting to get frustrated and a little confused, wondering if the guy at the counter had just given me the wrong directions without even thinking about it. But then I noticed the stairs continuing upward, and something pulled me toward them. Maybe it was the thirst. Maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, I kept going up. The third floor was different the moment I stepped onto it. The lighting was dimmer up there, and the air felt colder, like the heat from the rest of the building had not reached that level. The shelves were sparse, and the whole floor had a kind of abandoned feeling to it, like nobody really came up here very often, or maybe had not come up in a very long time. I moved slowly through the space, and that was when I saw it at the far end of the floor, hanging on the wall where you would normally expect to find nothing more than a blank surface, or maybe a store sign. It was a painting, large and framed in dark wood, and it stopped me completely when I saw what it showed. There was a man in the painting, standing upright, and he had no face. Not disfigured, not shadowed, just completely blank where the face should have been. Smooth skin where the eyes and nose and mouth were supposed to be. And his hands were raised up to where his face was, holding something. He was holding his own face in his hands, separated from his head, and even though the face in his hands had no features either, his whole body was shaped like he was screaming. The posture of it, the tension in the shoulders, and the way the head was thrown back slightly, it all screamed even without a mouth to do it with. I stood there longer than I should have. I told myself it was just strange art, that artists make weird things all the time, and that there was no reason for me to be standing in the soda aisle of a late-night mart feeling like my skin was crawling. I forced myself to look away and kept moving. I found the drinks toward the back of that floor, grabbed a cold soda from the shelf, and started making my way back toward the stairs. But as I passed the painting again, I stopped. I do not know why I stopped. Something made me look at it one more time, and when I did, I felt it before I understood it. Something was wrong. My eyes moved over the painting slowly, trying to figure out what had changed, and then it hit me all at once. The frame was there. The dark wooden frame was still hanging on the wall. But the painting inside it was gone. The canvas was empty. The faceless man, the screaming posture, the hands holding the face, all of it had simply vanished. There was nothing inside the frame but a faint yellowish stain on old canvas. The soda slipped out of my hand. I heard it hit the floor and roll away, but I did not look down. My legs had started shaking in a way I could not control. Not nervous shaking, but the kind of trembling that happens when your body knows something is very wrong before your brain has finished processing it. I turned and I ran. Down the stairs, past the empty shelves, back through the silent store until I could see the cashier still sitting at the counter with his book. I must have looked absolutely terrified because my voice came out broken and stammering when I tried to talk to him. I told him there was a ghost on the third floor. I told him about the painting and how the figure inside it had disappeared. He did not look up right away. He just said it calmly, the way you talk to someone who is confused or maybe a little drunk. He said their store did not have a third floor. He said I would have found the soda on the second floor if I had looked properly. His voice was flat and unbothered, like he had answered a silly question and was already ready to go back to his book. I told him that was impossible. I told him I had just come from up there, that there were shelves in a hallway and a painting hanging on the wall of a faceless man. My voice was getting louder, and I could not help it. He finally responded to that, his voice losing its calm for the first time. He said there was no painting. He said the only thing hanging on the second floor near the back was a mirror, and he said it like I should have known that, like it was obvious. And then, maybe because of the way I was still shaking, or maybe because something in my voice finally reached him, he looked up from his book for the first time since I had walked into the store. He looked up, and his eyes found my face. And then he screamed. It was not a small sound or a gasp. It was a full, horrified scream that tore through the silence of the empty store and bounced off every wall and every shelf. His chair scraped backward, and he collapsed, his whole body going down behind the counter like his legs had just given out completely underneath him. I tried to call out to him, tried to ask what was wrong, but my voice would not come. It was like something had reached into my throat and closed around it. No sound came out at all. I stood there for a moment that felt stretched and wrong. And then, slowly, I turned my head toward the front of the store. The glass doors at the entrance were dark, the fog still pressing against the outside of them, and in that darkness the glass was acting like a mirror I could see the store reflected in it. I could see the counter and the shelves and the flickering light near the entrance. I could see myself standing there. My body was there. My clothes, my posture, everything exactly where it should be. But above my shoulders, where my face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, no expression. Just smooth, pale, unbroken skin stretched over the shape of a head with no features on it at all. The same blankness from the painting, the same erasure. The faceless man from the frame was gone because he had not disappeared. He had found a new face to take. And somewhere between the third floor and the counter, without knowing it, without feeling it happen, I had become him. Story 2. This happened to me when I was a teenager, and even now, years later, I still do not fully know what to do with it. Part of me thinks it was stress, fear, isolation, and a mind that was too full of strange thoughts. Another part of me is not so sure. I have replayed every detail so many times that the memory feels sharper now than it did when I was living through it. Maybe that is why it still stays with me. It was not just one dream or one strange message. It was the way everything seemed to connect, one thing leading quietly into the next, until I could not tell where normal life ended and something darker began. This all happened in 2020, the year everything changed. I was supposed to turn 16 that year. For most people, 16 is meant to feel exciting. It is supposed to be an age you look forward to. But 2020 did not feel exciting at all. It felt heavy. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. Every day there was more bad news, more fear, more stories about sickness, death, lockdowns, and uncertainty. Everyone was stuck at home. School moved online. Days blurred together. Time felt strange, like it was moving too slowly and too fast at once. I was a teenager, alone with my thoughts for longer than I had ever been before. I think that matters. When you are young and the world outside suddenly becomes frightening, your imagination can become even worse. You start noticing things you would normally laugh off. You start connecting moments that maybe are not connected at all. At that time, I was already feeling uneasy. I was having strange dreams almost every night. Some of them were hard to remember, but they always left me with a bad feeling when I woke up. It was the kind of fear that stayed in your chest for hours, even if you could not explain why. I also remember thinking, over and over, that the world was going to end. It sounds dramatic now, but during that year, it did not feel dramatic. It felt possible. The whole atmosphere of 2020 made everything feel fragile. I would scroll through the news, see people panicking, hear adults talking in worried voices, and then go to sleep with that fear sitting in my mind. I started to feel as if something huge and terrible was waiting just around the corner. Because I had so much free time, I spent a lot of it watching shows online. Like most people during lockdown, I needed some kind of escape. One of the shows I became obsessed with was Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I watched it more than I probably should have. It pulled me in completely. I loved the dark mood, the supernatural story, the feeling that normal life and evil could exist side by side without warning. There was one part of the show that stayed in my mind more than anything else. In the story, the main character is supposed to give her soul to the devil when she turns 16. At first, it was just something from the show, a creepy idea that made the plot interesting. But the more I watched, and the more isolated and anxious I became, the more that idea began to sink into me. I was also about to turn 16. That detail started bothering me in a way I could not explain. I knew it was fiction. I knew it was just a show. Still, once a thought gets into your head at the wrong time, logic does not always help. The closer my birthday got, the more uncomfortable I became. It was embarrassing. even to myself. I did not want to admit that a TV show was affecting me so much, but late at night, when the house was quiet and I was alone in bed, I would think about that scene, about turning 16, about making some dark promise without meaning to. I started feeling like something was waiting for that date. I told myself I was being stupid, but fear does not always listen to reason. Then, something happened that made it worse. About 3 weeks before my 16th birthday, my best friend texted me out of nowhere. It was nothing unusual for us to message each other, but the tone of her texts felt different right away. She told me she had seen me in her dream. That got my attention, but not in a serious way at first. People dream about their friends all the time. I asked her what she saw, expecting something random or funny. Instead, she told me that in her dream, a white man with ginger hair and blue eyes spoke to her. He told her that she had to talk to me, and that I already knew. I remember staring at that message for a long time. I asked her what she meant. She repeated it. A white man. Ginger hair. Blue eyes. He told her to speak to me, and he said that I already knew. She could not explain it any better than that. It was just a dream. But the way she said it unsettled me badly. There was something about the sentence "you already know" that got under my skin. It made no sense, but it felt personal. It felt like a message dropped into my life from somewhere outside of it. The timing made it much worse. If she had sent me that at any other point in my life, maybe I would have laughed and forgotten it. But she sent it when I was already scared, already obsessed with dark thoughts, already counting down the days until I turned 16. That one message made all my private fears feel less private. Until then, it had just been me overthinking in my room. After that, it felt like something had reached beyond my own mind. I did not tell many people how shaken I was. I think I tried to act normal, but inside I was terrified. I started looking at the date more often. I kept wondering if something was going to happen on my birthday. I imagined all kinds of impossible things. Maybe I would see something in my room. Maybe I would wake up and know something had changed. Maybe I would have some horrible dream. I know how that sounds. But when fear builds slowly over weeks, it can make anything feel possible. Then, my birthday finally came. The night I turned 16, I was more afraid than I want to admit. I went to bed almost expecting some kind of sign. I was scared to fall asleep, and I was scared to stay awake. I remember lying there in the dark, listening to every sound in the house, my heart beating too fast. I kept thinking of the devil, of bargains, of souls, of that stupid show, of my friend's dream, of the sentence "you already know." I was waiting for something. I did not even know what. But nothing happened. No shadow appeared. No voice spoke. No nightmare woke me up screaming. The night passed like any other night. Morning came. I was still myself. In a strange way, I felt both relieved and foolish. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe I had scared myself for no reason. Maybe all of it had been a perfect storm of anxiety, boredom, and too much screen time during a terrible year. For a while, life continued. Things still felt weird because the whole world still felt weird, but that specific fear became quieter. It did not fully disappear, but it moved to the back of my mind. I tried not to feed it anymore. I tried not to think about devils or signs or messages hidden in dreams. Then, a few months later, something happened that brought it all back. One day, I took a nap in the afternoon. That was unusual for me. Normally, I would not sleep during the day, especially because I had an online class later and did not want to miss it. But that day, I felt tired enough to lie down just for a little while. I thought it would be a quick rest. Instead, I had one of the strangest dreams of my life. In the dream, I saw myself dancing with the devil. That image sounds dramatic, but what made it frightening was not just what I saw. It was the feeling of the dream. It felt too clear, too close. I was not watching from far away. I was in it. There was movement, music without sound, and a heavy sense that I was participating in something I should never have been part of. I cannot describe the devil's face in exact detail, but in the dream I knew who he was. It was not a question. It was not a symbol. In that moment, I understood him as the devil, and I was dancing with him like I belonged there. When I woke up, I felt deeply unsettled. My body had that cold, shaken feeling you get after a nightmare that hits too hard. But at the same time, I tried to ignore it. I had already spent too much time frightening myself. So I pushed the dream away, got on with my day, and told myself not to give it power. I had things to do. I had class later. I did not want to sit and spiral over a daytime nap. That night, I went on Instagram. I was just checking my account the way anyone does, casually, with no expectations. Then I saw that I had a message request. That was not very common for me. At the time, I barely used the app in any serious way. I opened it, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The message was from a satanic community. Not only had they contacted me, but they had also sent me an invitation to their Discord group chat. Even now, that part bothers me more than almost anything else. At that time, I had never interacted with satanic posts. I had not searched for that kind of content. I had not followed pages like that. My account was basically empty. I had one follower, and it was my mom. That was it. So when I saw that message, right after having a dream about dancing with the devil, I had no normal explanation for why it had reached me. Maybe there was one. Maybe random communities sent invites to many people. Maybe it was spam. Maybe the algorithm was strange. But in that moment, after everything that had already happened, it did not feel random at all. I just sat there, staring at the screen. The timing was too perfect. Too cruel, almost. First the fear before my birthday. Then, my friend's dream. Then months later, a nap in the middle of the day where I saw myself dancing with the devil. And then, that same night, a message request from a satanic community with a Discord invite sent to an account that had almost no activity and no connection to anything like that. It felt like something had noticed me. That is the only way I can describe the feeling. I wanted to delete it immediately. I also wanted to keep looking at it, as if it would explain itself if I stared long enough. In the end, I tried to brush it off. I did not join the group. I did not answer the message. I told myself that if I ignored it, it would become meaningless. On the outside, that is what I did. But inside, it stayed with me. For years, it stayed with me. It was one of those memories that returns at random times. I would be doing something completely normal, and suddenly I would remember that message and feel the same chill again. I thought about the dream. I thought about my friend's words. I thought about how little sense it all made. Sometimes I convinced myself it was just coincidence. Other times I would think about it late at night and feel sure there had been something more behind it. As I got older, I became less afraid in the simple, childish way I had been at 16. I was no longer lying awake expecting horns and fire. But fear can change shape instead of disappearing. It can become curiosity. It can become obsession. It can become a need to go back and touch the thing that once scared you, just to prove to yourself that it is not stronger than you anymore. That is exactly what happened to me. 2 or 3 years later, I found that Discord group chat again. I do not even remember exactly how I came across it after all that time, but somehow it was there in front of me again, like a door I had once refused to open. By then I was older. I told myself I was not scared anymore. I wanted answers. Or maybe I just wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to prove that the whole thing had been ordinary after all. So I joined. Nothing dramatic happened the second I entered. There was no instant sign from the universe. It was just a group chat online. People talking. People sharing thoughts, beliefs, strange stories, jokes, and experiences. But even so, I felt nervous being there. It was as if I had stepped back into something I had left unfinished years earlier. While I was there, I met a guy online. We started talking, and eventually we spoke about the strange things we had both experienced. It was one of those conversations that gets deeper than you expect. You begin with curiosity, and then suddenly you are telling someone about the moments you normally keep to yourself because they sound too weird when spoken out loud. I told him about 2020. I told him about turning 16. I told him about the show I had been watching, my fear that the devil was coming for me, my friend's dream about the white man with ginger hair and blue eyes, the message that said I already knew, the daytime nap, the dream of dancing with the devil, and the Instagram requests from the satanic community. He listened. He also shared his own experiences, and the whole conversation left me with that same old feeling from years before, the feeling that I was standing too close to something I did not understand. Then, on the very day we talked about all of this, all the lights went out in his town. Maybe it was just a power outage. Realistically, that is probably exactly what it was. Towns lose power. It happens. But the timing again felt impossible to ignore. Out of all days, it happened on the day we opened up this subject and spoke about these strange things in detail. I remember how eerie that felt. It was as if the conversation itself had disturbed something. Rationally, I know how that sounds. Emotionally, it still unsettles me. By that point, I had learned that fear does not always come from what you see. Sometimes it comes from patterns. It comes from timing. It comes from moments that could be random, but feel too exact to be random. One coincidence can be ignored. Two can be explained away. But when they start piling up over years, your mind begins to treat them like clues, even if you do not want it to. Now, if I am being honest, I am not scared of the devil in the same way anymore. I do not spend my nights waiting for something to appear at the end of my bed. I do not panic over every dark dream. Time changes things. Life becomes bigger than the fears you had at 16. But some thoughts stay behind like a stain. They fade, but they do not fully vanish. The strangest part, the part I almost never say out loud, is this. There was another dream where I saw him again. In that dream, I told him I would give him my soul if he helped me move abroad. That sentence sounds insane when I say it plainly, but that is what happened in the dream. I cannot pretend I do not remember it. I said it. I made that offer. Maybe it was meaningless because it was only a dream. Maybe dreams are just strange stories made by the sleeping brain. Nothing more. But I said the words, and they stayed with me after I woke up. And then, later, I did move abroad. That is the fact that troubles me sometimes. I had wanted to move, and eventually I did. There are normal reasons for that. Real life reasons. Plans, choices, opportunities, effort. I know that. I am not saying I woke up from the dream and suddenly my whole life changed by magic. Life does not work like that. But still, there are moments when I think back to that dream and feel a cold question rise in me. What if that promise counted for something? I do not know if I believe that. I do not know if I should believe it. Maybe my own mind attached meaning to the move afterward, because humans are built to create stories from coincidence. Maybe I wanted the move so badly that my dream simply reflected that desire in the darkest way possible. A frightened teenage mind can turn anything into a bargain. especially after years of fear, symbols, and half-believed ideas. That could be all this is. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if he got my soul after all. Not in the dramatic movie way. Not with fire and chains and some clear sign that can never be denied. More in the subtle way these things seem to work in stories like mine. A fear enters your mind. A message appears. A dream follows. Another dream returns years later. You say something you should not say, even in sleep. Then life moves forward, and the thing you asked for comes true. Nothing is obvious. Nothing can be proven. Yet the question remains. That is what makes it stay with me. If there had been one loud event, maybe I could have rejected it or believed it completely. Instead, I was left with pieces. A year filled with fear. A show that got too deep into my head. A 16th birthday that felt cursed before it even arrived. A best friend dreaming of a strange man who said I already knew. A nap and a dance with the devil. A message from a satanic community sent to an account that should never have attracted it. A Discord invite waiting like a test. Years of thinking about it. A conversation with someone who understood strange experiences, followed by a blackout in his town the same day. And then a dream bargain about moving abroad, followed by the fact that I really did move. Maybe every single part of this can be explained. Stress, isolation, algorithms, coincidence, suggestion, imagination, memory. Maybe that is the truth. Maybe the scariest thing is not the devil at all, but how easily fear can shape the world around you until everything starts to look like a sign. Still, I cannot completely shake the feeling that something was there, just beyond what I could see, watching me during that strange time in my life and waiting for me to notice. I do not know what I believe now. I only know what happened and how it felt while it was happening. I know that 2020 changed me. I know that turning 16 felt less like growing up and more like stepping into a shadow I could not explain. I know that some dreams leave marks long after morning comes. And I know that even now, after moving abroad and building a different life, there are nights when I remember all of it and wonder whether I was just a scared teenage girl with too much time and too many dark thoughts, or whether something answered me when I was too young to understand what I was inviting in. Story 3. I never thought I would be so grateful to be a parent. For the longest time, I saw parenthood as nothing more than a curse. 18 years of your life just borrowed away from you, handed over to someone else before you even had the chance to figure out what you wanted to do with it yourself. That is exactly why I swore I would never have kids. I told myself it was not for me, that I was not built for it, that I would live my life on my own terms without ever having to worry about another human being depending on me for everything. I was so sure of that promise, so confident that I had my future all figured out. But life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you did not ask for. And for me, that moment came when I was still just a child myself. I was 17 years old when my little Joshie was born, 8 pounds, 6 ounces, a winter baby. I remember standing in that hospital room feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I was not ready. I was nowhere close to ready. I guess I was just scared at the time. Scared of all the responsibilities, sure. But more than anything, I was scared that I did not have what it takes. Me and his mother had only been together for about 2 years before we made the same dumb mistake as every other teen parent in the country. We were kids playing house, pretending we knew what love was. And then suddenly, there was a real, live baby screaming in our arms, and neither one of us had any idea what to do next. I thought about what this meant for me, what I was going to have to become in order to support this new life outside of my own. I thought about all the things I would have to give up, all the freedom I would never get to taste. And I will be honest with you, it made me feel sick. I was almost reluctant when I had to start working. Actually, reluctant is not even the right word for it. The word I am looking for is probably closer to resentful. I resented the fact that I had to grow up before I was ready. I resented the early mornings and the late nights and the endless grind of trying to keep everything together when I could barely keep myself together. Of course, that feeling only lasted for around a year or two. Or maybe it did not. Maybe it followed me around all the way up the corporate ladder as I went from employee to supervisor all the way up to district manager. Every promotion, every raise, every step forward in my career felt hollow because I did not get the pride of knowing I had done it for myself. I had not made something out of myself because that was what I wanted for myself. I did it because I needed to. I did it because there was a baby at home who needed diapers and formula and a roof over his head. I may have been resentful, but I was not the kind of person to let my baby starve. I was not the kind of person to not show up for my baby's mother. I had that much decency in me, even if I did not have much else. Even still, she noticed how withdrawn I had become. She saw the distance in my eyes every time I came home from work. She was the only one singing his lullabies at night, tucking him in, kissing his forehead, comforting him when he cried. For a long time, the extent of parental bonding between me and my son was when I gave him the occasional bath, or when I changed his diapers. In my mind, my only job was to keep food on the table. That was it. That was the beginning and the end of what I thought fatherhood meant. I told myself that providing was enough, that as long as there was money coming in and the lights stayed on, I was doing my part. But deep down, I think I knew that was not true. I think I knew I was hiding behind the paycheck because I was too afraid to actually be a father. It drove a wedge between me and his mom. During those early years, we found ourselves fighting nearly every night. She demanded a kind of presence that I just did not believe I possessed. She wanted me to hold him, to play with him, to sit on the floor and build little towers out of blocks and knock them down just to hear him laugh. She wanted me to be there, really be there, not just in the house, but in the moment. And I could not do it. I did not know how. So instead, we screamed at each other. The fights got louder, got uglier. There was wall punching and door slamming and the kind of things that no toddler should ever have to see. Joshua was there to witness all of it. Every single ugly moment. He sat there on the floor with wide eyes, watching his parents tear each other apart, and I was too wrapped up in my own misery to even notice what it was doing to him. It got to a point where we did not even know what we were doing anymore, why we were even still together, what the point of any of it was. I guess the answer was Joshie, because despite what I felt, there was still a part of me deep down that wanted to give my son a good life. Even if I did not know how to show up for him emotionally, I could still fight to make sure he lived comfortably. I could still make sure he had everything he needed, even if I could not give him everything he wanted. That was the thread I held on to. That was the only thing keeping me from walking out the door and never coming back. When his mother died, though, it was like I became numb to absolutely everything. There was no light at the end of the tunnel, no superficial hope of maybe someday being an actual functioning family after I stopped being so pathetic. God made sure that I learned my lesson in the most eye-opening way imaginable. It was not sudden. It was not some unexpected tragic loss that hit us out of nowhere. We had to watch her as she dwindled away more and more every single day. Watch her cheeks sink in and darken. Watch her lose her hair in clumps on the pillow. Watch her lose her weight until she looked like a stranger lying in that hospital bed. We watched her take her last breath. We were right there when it happened. The beep of her heart monitor flattened out into that long, terrible, endless tone, and both of us just broke down, crying. I held my son in my arms, and we cried together. And it was one of the only times I had ever held him like that. It took her dying for me to finally hold my son the way a father should. Joshie was only 6 years old when she passed. He was too young to really understand the concept of death, but he was old enough to know that his mom was not there anymore. Old enough to feel the pain that came with knowing she was not coming back. Old enough to walk into her room and stare at the empty bed and wonder why the world suddenly felt so cold and quiet. And you know what I did during that time? I made him sleep alone. In the dark, in his own bed, in his own room, all by himself, while he was grieving the loss of his mother at 6 years old. I know how that sounds. I know what kind of person that makes me. I am a terrible person, but I am trying, okay? I am trying to do better. For 6 weeks, I made him sleep alone in that room. I pretended to be asleep when he came to my door and asked if he could sleep in my bed. I lay there with my eyes shut, listening to his little voice calling out to me, and I did not move. I did not answer. I outright refused him sometimes, told him to go back to his room, told him he was a big boy, and big boys sleep in their own beds. I can still hear the sound of his little footsteps padding back down the hallway. I can still hear the soft click of his bedroom door closing behind him. I was afraid of needing him, afraid he would need me too, afraid that if I let him in, if I let myself feel anything at all, the weight of it would crush me completely. I learned a lot during those 6 weeks. I was in the dark too. The amount of responsibility that now fell on my shoulders was so overwhelming that it numbed me. I was the only one now. There was no one else to pick up the slack. No one else to sing the lullabies or kiss the forehead or comfort the crying child in the middle of the night. It was all on me, and I could not handle it. I told myself that I could not fail if I did not try. That was what I truly believed. That was what I had convinced myself of in a state of vulnerability and exhaustion. But I was failing. I had, without question, failed harder than I had ever failed in my entire life. And somewhere in the fog of all that numbness and all that fear, I finally came to that realization. It hit me one night when I heard him crying through the wall. Not loud crying. Not the kind of crying that demands attention. It was the quiet kind. The kind where a child has already given up on being heard and is just crying for himself because there is no one else to cry to. That sound broke something inside of me, and when it broke, everything else came flooding in. Every moment I had missed, every lullaby I never sang, every bedtime story I never read. Every time he reached for me and I pulled away, I made a vow to myself that night to step up, to be the man that my son needed me to be. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more excuses. I started letting him sleep in my bed routinely. Every single night he would climb up next to me and curl into my side, and I would sing to him until his breathing slowed and little snores escaped his throat. I rocked him in my lap on the living room chair, the same chair his mother used to sit in, and I held him close, and I did not let go. I took him to the park every day, bought him new toys every week, watched movies with him on the couch with a big bowl of popcorn between us. I played with him in the yard, got down on my hands and knees in the dirt, and actually played with my son for the first time in his life. It was like I was trying to make up for all of the lost time, and maybe I was. Maybe I knew that no amount of effort would ever truly erase the damage I had done, but I had to try. I had to at least try. Josh became more comfortable during this period. He talked to me more, opened up to me about things. He told me about his day at school, told me about his friends, told me about the things that made him happy and the things that scared him. I finally learned what he actually liked. His favorite foods, his favorite superheroes, his favorite cartoons, the way he liked his sandwiches cut. All of those little details that a father should know by heart, but that I had never bothered to learn. For the first time in my life, I actually felt attentive. I felt like more than just a paycheck and the occasional bath. I felt like a dad. He also revealed some things that troubled me a bit, though. The kind of things that made me worry that his mother's death had hit him harder than he was letting on. Like, for example, I had been talking casually with him one morning while we ate cereal and watched some Saturday morning cartoons. I think we had been joking around about one of the scenes from SpongeBob, just laughing and being silly together when we heard a dish crash in the kitchen. Now, me personally, I had nearly jumped out of my skin at the sudden burst of noise. My heart was pounding, and I was already halfway off the couch before I even realized what had happened. But Josh, he hardly even flinched. He just sat there, calmly, with his spoon in his cereal, completely unbothered, like it was the most normal thing in the world. That was just Mom, I think he said, as calmly as possible. She comes up here sometimes. I could not help but look at him sideways when he said that. My stomach tightened, and I felt this strange, uncomfortable feeling settle over me, but I tried to keep things light. "Is that right?" I asked, playing along. "You think that is your mom in there?" "Yeah, probably. I hear her walking around sometimes. She is super loud." My heart broke for him when he said that. The imagination of a child does some miraculous things when grief is involved, and I figured that was all this was. His way of coping, his way of keeping her close. I would not be surprised if he really did believe his mom was still just hiding around the house somewhere, waiting to come out and scoop him up and hold him the way she used to. Well, I will have to keep a better ear out. Hopefully, I will hear her too one day. Josh's head turned slowly in my direction. He stared at me for a moment, and there was something in his eyes that I could not quite read. Something older than his years. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You don't already? She talks about you all the time." I felt a chill run down my spine, a real physical chill that started at the base of my skull and traveled all the way down to the small of my back. "I wish I did, buddy. What exactly does she say about me?" It is hard to hear her sometimes. She is usually always in the basement. I think she cries a lot. A silence lingered in the air for a long while after that. I sat there staring at the television without really seeing it, my mind turning over his words again and again as I tried to figure out how to appropriately respond. Clearly, he was hurting. He was trying to make sense of a terrible thing in the only way a 6-year-old knows how. It had to have been a part of his process. A phase. Something he would grow out of once the grief softened and time did what time does. But I did not like the sound of his whole "she is usually in the basement" comment. It was oddly specific. It did not sound like something he just told himself to cope. It did not sound like a fantasy or a daydream or the kind of imaginary friend scenario that kids his age sometimes create. It felt real. It felt like he was describing something he had actually experienced, something he had actually heard, and that made me uneasy in a way I could not explain. I guess that is why I started listening so intently at night. After Josh would fall asleep next to me, I would lie there in the dark with my eyes wide open, training my ears to pick up even the slightest of noises while the house was silent. I knew she was gone. I knew that logically and rationally and with every reasonable part of my brain, but a part of me still believed I could catch a glimpse of her. A whisper, a footstep, something, anything. It was delusional, but I was weak. I was vulnerable. I was a grieving man lying in the dark, hoping to hear the voice of a woman who was never going to speak again. Some nights, I really thought I could hear her. Whispers flowed faintly through the ventilation, so soft and so distant that I could never quite make out the words. Soft cries snaked their way into my eardrums at odd hours of the night, always from somewhere below, always from somewhere deep within the house. I would hold my breath and listen, straining so hard that my ears would ring. And just when I thought I had caught something, it would disappear into silence again. I told myself it was the house settling, old pipes, the wind outside, my own grief playing tricks on me in the dark. But the more I listened, the harder it became to convince myself of that. My son started acting strangely around this time, really strangely. I would wake up in the middle of the night and reach for him, and the spot beside me would be empty. I would find him standing silently in front of the basement door, just standing there, staring blankly at the door with hollow, empty eyes. It would be 3 o'clock in the morning, the whole house dark and still, and there he would be, unmoving, not crying, not calling for me, not doing anything at all, except staring at that door like he was waiting for it to open, like he was waiting for someone on the other side to invite him in. I caught him talking to himself, too, whispering under his breath as though someone else were in the room with him. He would be sitting on the floor of his bedroom or standing in the hallway or tucked into the corner of the living room, and his lips would be moving, but the words were barely there. All I ever managed to catch were brief little pieces of the conversation, fragments that floated to me before he noticed I was listening and went quiet. But what I heard was still enough to make my heart throb in my chest. He is doing better. He spends time with me now. He tells me he loves me. I do not want to leave him yet. I found it wholesome at first. It was actually pretty heartwarming to know that I was redeeming myself in his eyes, that all the effort I had been putting in was not going unnoticed. Even in his little imaginary conversations with his mother, he was defending me, telling her that I had changed, that I was trying. I allowed myself to have hope that I was doing something right for once in my miserable life. The feeling proved to be short-lived. Unfortunately, in the weeks that followed, Josh actually became withdrawn and distant. He stopped talking to me at meals, stopped laughing at cartoons, stopped climbing into my bed at night. It almost felt like he was avoiding me, pulling away from me the same way I had pulled away from him all those years before. And I wanted to find out why. So I asked him, "You have been pretty quiet lately. Anything you want to talk about?" He looked up from his bowl of cereal, spoon in hand, and stared at me for a moment. He was analyzing me, studying my face the way a child should never have to study their father's face. Then he looked around the room, checking the corners, checking the doorway, like he was making sure no one else was listening. Then he gestured for me to lean down so he could whisper in my ear. "Mom says I should not talk to you." The words hit me like cold water. I pulled back and looked at him, searching his face for some sign that he was joking, but there was nothing there. Just fear. Why would she tell you that? "She knows you can talk to me about anything," I replied, and I could hear the hurt in my own voice. I was almost offended. "She says you hate me. She says you do not love me because I was born." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had been working so hard, putting so much into making my mistakes up to him. And now it was like my heart was shattering into a million pieces right there at the kitchen table. Apparently, so was his. because I could see the tears welling up in his eyes, and his little lip was trembling, and he looked so small and so afraid sitting there in that chair. She says you want to hurt me. She can feel it. She knows what you think. She hears it for me because she says you do not like to say it out loud. Through tears and with a broken voice, I did my best to respond to him. I got down on my knees so I was at his level, and I took his little hands in mine, and I looked him straight in the eyes. Joshy, honey, no, no, no. I would never hurt you. Daddy had you when he was still a baby, too. It is scary, buddy. But all I ever wanted was to make sure you grew up happy. You are the most important thing in my life. You are everything to me. Do you understand that? He looked at me with those big wet eyes, and his voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. I do not feel very happy. Before I could say anything else, there was a huge crash in the living room. It was loud, violent, like something heavy had been thrown across the room. Josh jumped in his seat and immediately pulled into himself, shrinking down like he was trying to disappear. His eyes went wide, and his whole body went stiff, and I could see the terror on his face. It is okay. I will go check it out. Just stay here for me, okay? I will be right back. When I entered the living room, I stopped so hard that my socks slid across the hardwood floor. Every single family photo we owned lay broken in a neat little pile in the center of the room. Every single one. Photos of me and his mother. Photos of the three of us together. Baby pictures. Holiday pictures. All of them had been pulled off the walls and off the shelves and arranged deliberately in the middle of the floor. The broken frames looked carefully placed, almost ritualistic, and glass glistened atop the hardwood like scattered diamonds. This was not something that fell. This was not an accident. Someone or something had done this on purpose. As I stood there in shock at what I was seeing, trying to process what was happening, my son snaked past me and disappeared down the hallway toward his room. I could hear him whispering as he went, his voice high and panicked and trembling. She heard me. She heard me. Oh gosh, she heard me. I must have spent a solid 45 minutes picking glass off the floor, and my mind raced the entire time I cleaned. I could not get Josh's words out of my head. I did not hate him. I never hated him. God, you have to believe me. I know I was not there the way I should have been. I know I failed him in ways that a father should never fail his son. But I never hated him. Not for a single second. Not even in my darkest moments. Trash bag in hand, I headed downstairs to toss the garbage into the bin outside. That is where I found him, standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the door to the basement, swaying back and forth, slowly, rhythmically, like a pendulum, whispering to himself in a voice so small and so desperate that it made my blood run cold. Please do not make me go. 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 He said it over and over and over again, and each time the words got quieter, like whatever was on the other side of that door was slowly winning the argument. I stood there watching him, too afraid to move, too afraid to speak, and then the basement door slowly opened on its own. It swung inward, revealing near complete darkness. No light, no sound, just a black void that seemed to breathe. Josh turned toward me slowly. His face was blank. His eyes were empty. But there was something behind them, something that was not quite him, something that looked out at me from behind my son's face and made every instinct in my body scream. She is just trying to protect me. Those were his last words to me before he turned back around and disappeared down the dark stairwell. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. And then the darkness swallowed him whole, and the door drifted shut behind him without a sound. I felt frozen in place, completely glued to the floor. My legs would not move. My voice would not work. It was like something was holding me there, pinning me down with invisible hands, and no matter how hard I tried to break free, my body refused to listen. It felt like hours passed before I finally snapped out of it, before the trance broke and my instincts kicked in and my legs started moving on their own. I crept down the stairs slowly, calling Josh's name every few steps. My voice echoed off the concrete walls and came back to me empty. I received no reply, no footsteps, no whispers, no crying. Nothing, in fact. Everything seemed more still than it had ever been before. The air was thick and cold, and there was a smell down there that I had never noticed before. Something old. Something wrong. I searched the basement up and down. I combed through every square inch of that room, behind the storage boxes, under the old furniture, inside the closet, behind the water heater, every single corner, every single shadow. Josh was nowhere to be found. He had just disappeared without a trace, without a single sound. Like the darkness had reached out and taken him, folded him into itself, and closed the door behind him. I tried to fight the panic, but it seeped through the cracks. It left me running in circles, repeating Josh's name over and over again to no avail. My voice cracked and broke and eventually turned into screaming. And still there was nothing, just silence, just the cold, dead silence of an empty basement. I ended up calling the police. They came quickly and searched the house themselves, and they too found nothing. No sign of Josh, no sign of forced entry, no sign of anything at all. When I explained what happened, when I told them about the basement door opening on its own, and my son walking down those stairs and vanishing into thin air, they looked at me like I was insane. There was suspicion in their eyes, the kind of suspicion that made my stomach turn. It was as though they thought it was somehow my fault, and when they told me, they would be in touch. There was a bit of an accusatory tone in their voice that made me feel like I was already guilty of something I did not do. I went to bed that night feeling empty, lost, completely shocked and broken all over again. The bed felt enormous without him next to me. The house felt like a tomb. I could not even sleep. All I could do was stare up at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, lazy circles above me, watching the clock on my nightstand as the numbers changed. 11 at night, midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. The hours crawled by like they were dragging themselves through mud, and the silence pressed in on me from every direction, heavy and suffocating and alive. At around 2:30 in the morning, I started hearing things. I thought I was losing my mind at first. I thought the grief and the guilt and the exhaustion had finally cracked me wide open, and I was hearing things that were not there. But the more time went on, the more clear the noises became. They were not imagined. They were not the house settling or the wind outside or the pipes groaning in the walls. They were real. I heard giggling, soft, childlike giggling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then whispers. Then laughs. They came through the walls and nested in my eardrums, growing louder and clearer with every passing second. It was hard to figure out exactly when it started, but by the end I heard what was unmistakably my son. His voice, his laugh, coming from somewhere below me, coming from the basement. Dad, Mom says you can come down now. Story 4. The heat that day was the main reason I decided to go on the cave tour. Wales had not been what I expected when we booked the trip, In my head, I had pictured gray skies, wind, and light rain drifting across green hills. Instead, we got a hot, bright day that made the air feel heavy and still. I had also made the usual mistake the night before. Too many drinks, not enough water, and only a few hours of bad sleep. I was hungover, though not as badly as my friends, who were all lying half dead in our hotel room when I left. One was face down across the bed, another had one foot hanging off the mattress, and the third had pulled the curtains shut like sunlight itself had personally offended him. No one wanted to move. No one wanted breakfast. No one wanted to do anything at all. I, on the other hand, felt bad enough to be uncomfortable, but not bad enough to waste the whole day. We had come all the way out to Wales to actually see something. A cave tour sounded perfect. Cool air, dim light, no sun beating down on my head, and no need to make conversation if I didn't feel like it. It seemed like the ideal way to survive the afternoon. I figured I could wander around underground for an hour or two, clear my head, then come back and act like I had done something meaningful while my friends recovered from their self-inflicted near-death states. The cave site was much more polished than I expected. I had imagined an old sign by the road and maybe a hut with a bored person selling tickets. Instead, there was a modern visitor center with clean glass doors, bright displays, a gift shop, neat benches, and posters about local history. It looked very professional, almost too professional for something that led underground into darkness. There were families there with children, older couples, a few solo travelers, and one group who sounded Japanese. Everyone stood around in that quiet, polite way tourists do, waiting to be told where to go next. The place had the feeling of a well-run attraction, the sort of place that had insurance, paperwork for everything, and probably sold postcards, tea towels, and little glow in the dark cave keychains. I bought my ticket, found a seat, and sat there, trying not to think about how dry my mouth was. The cool air inside the center helped. There was a small display with pieces of stone tools, maps of the cave system, and photos of old digs that had been done there. I only half paid attention. My head still had that soft pounding feeling that comes after a long night out. Every now and then I looked through the glass at the sunlight outside and felt grateful that I had made the right choice. Even before the tour had started, I already preferred this to walking around in the heat. After a while, our guide came out and called us over. He introduced himself as James. My first thought was that he looked exactly like a university student doing summer work to make money and counting the days until term started again. He had that faintly bored expression of someone who had said the same words so many times they no longer felt connected to any real meaning. Still, I have to be fair to him. If he was bored, he hit it well enough. He knew his script and delivered it smoothly, with a calm, practiced voice of someone who had repeated it 100 times. He welcomed us, gave us a few rules, and smiled in the places where he was supposed to smile. He told us to stay on the marked paths, not to cross any barriers, not to touch anything important, and to watch our step, because the stone could be very slippery. He mentioned the lighting, the low temperature, and the fact that some of the floor was uneven. He also gave the sort of cheerful warning that guides always give, where they make danger sound almost fun as long as you obey the signs. A few people laughed politely. I didn't. I was too busy hoping no one would ask me anything because I felt as if my brain was moving through syrup. Then the doors opened, and we followed him down toward the cave entrance. The change in temperature was immediate. One moment there was that hot summer air pressing against my skin, and the next there was coolness rising from the earth itself. It felt wonderful. The cave swallowed the day in a way that was deeply comforting. The light became softer, the walls damp and pale in places, darker in others, with mineral patterns that looked almost painted. The sound changed, too. Outside, there had been wind, footsteps, distant voices, birds inside. Every little sound seemed to travel strangely. A drip of water could sound close when it wasn't. A cough would bounce off the stone. Shoes scuffed and echoed. The cave paths had been built up well, with rails, careful lighting, and smooth walkways that made the place feel safe, or at least safe enough. James led us into the main chamber and gave us the usual information. He pointed out rock formations, talked about how long the cave had been there, and explained that people had used it thousands of years ago. One of the details that stuck with me was when he mentioned that in warm times, some of the old inhabitants had used the underground pools to swim. I remember actually feeling jealous at that moment, which was ridiculous. Standing there with a mild hangover in a cool cave, hearing about people from the Stone Age dipping into clear underground water, I thought they might have had the right idea. The chamber was beautiful in an eerie way. There were still pools that held the light and sent it trembling back up onto the ceiling. There were narrow passages branching off from the main area, each one fading into partial shadow, even with the modern lamps in place. Once James had taken us around the largest chamber and finished another stretch of information, he asked, "Any questions?" In a tone that clearly meant, "Please don't have any." No one did. Then he said we could spend about 10 minutes looking around the smaller side chambers and reading the information boards before we moved on. Most of the group spread out in pairs and little clusters. Some people immediately took photos. A couple of children tried to test how far away they could walk before their parents called them back. I wanted a few minutes alone, so I drifted farther than the others, toward one of the most distant chambers that had a little more darkness and quiet than the rest. That chamber was broader than I expected, with a central area and a path running around it. A safety barrier kept visitors from getting too close to a sloping drop of maybe 6 feet into a lower level. At the bottom of that slope, a narrow stream ran through the rock. The water made a constant soft sound, not loud, but enough to fill the silence. There was an information board there, and I stepped close to read it. It explained that the chamber had once been used for burials, even in a place like that, with tourists only a short distance away and electric lights in the ceiling. The words gave me a bad feeling. There is something different about standing where people once put their dead. It changes the air around you, even if that is only in your head. I was reading about how archaeologists believe the chamber had served as a kind of burial site for a local group, and how remains had been found in different parts of the cave when the lights went out. At first, I thought they had just dimmed. Then I realized they were gone completely. The darkness was total. Not just ordinary darkness, but the kind that feels wrong because your eyes cannot find anything at all to hold on to. It was so complete that it felt solid, like something standing in front of me. I couldn't see the board anymore. I couldn't see my own hand. The cave seemed to become much bigger at once, as if the walls had moved away the moment the light disappeared. There was a sharp intake of breath somewhere in the distance. Then a voice. Then silence again, except for the water. Every nerve in my body went awake. The hangover vanished in a second. I stood very still at first, afraid to move in case I stepped off the path. The dark pressed around me from every side. I heard a drop of water hit stone and nearly flinched. I remember thinking how easily people panic when their eyes stop helping them. I took my phone from my pocket with clumsy fingers and turned on the flashlight. It was weak. It helped, but only a little. It lit my shoes, the path right in front of me, and bits of wet stone. Beyond that, the cave stayed thick with shadow. I turned to retrace my steps as carefully as I could, I had only gone a short distance when I heard someone running. The sound was wrong immediately. Fast, uneven footsteps, scraping and slipping, coming toward me in panic. I opened my mouth to warn them, but all that came out was a rough, useless sound before the person hit me. It was a woman. She crashed into me hard enough to drive the air from my chest, and in the same instant, she lost her footing. I somehow managed not to go down with her, but I was no longer fully on the path. My shoes slid on the wet stone, and I threw out a hand without thinking. I caught her arm, then her hand. She was crying already, or maybe gasping, or both. It happened so fast I could hardly tell. She tried to push herself up, but she couldn't find purchase. I realized she had slipped beyond the safe edge and was sliding down the bank toward the lower level. My own feet were starting to go with her. I dropped to one knee and grabbed harder. For a second, I thought I could pull her back. Then I felt the slime on the rock under my hand, the sweat on my skin, the angle of her weight pulling away from me, and I knew I was losing it. "Stop pulling," I said, or maybe shouted. "You're pulling me down." But she was too frightened to listen. She made a choking sound that turned into sobbing. Her hand clamped around mine so tightly it hurt. I dug the side of my shoe against the floor, trying to get some grip. But all I felt was my own body moving little by little toward the drop. The phone light had gone wild, jerking over stone, rail, shadow, then almost nothing. I could hear the stream below, close enough now to make the fall feel real. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might throw up. There is a point in some moments when your body decides before your mind does. I wish I could say I made some brave effort, or that I stayed calm, or that I thought clearly. I didn't. I felt myself slipping, imagined both of us going over, hitting the bottom in the dark, maybe breaking bones, maybe worse, and I panicked. I am ashamed of it even now, but I pried her hand off mine. I still remember the feel of her fingers sliding free. I remember the sound that came next too well. It was not a scream, not exactly. More a broken cry cut short by impact, and then another impact as she tumbled down the slope. Then the sound of stones shifting. Then sobbing again, lower now, from below. I froze for 1 second, maybe two, sick with shock. Then I leaned toward the dark and said, "I'm getting help. I'll be back with help." My voice sounded thin and unreal in the cave. She was still crying behind me as I turned away. Ahead, through the dark, I saw a green emergency light glowing faintly somewhere in the passage. It looked very far away. I kept my phone flashlight pointed at the ground and moved as fast as I dared, one hand skimming the wall, every step careful and clumsy at the same time. The cave no longer felt cool and pleasant. It felt hostile, ancient, and deeply indifferent. My breathing grew loud in my own ears. I thought I might hear someone else moving nearby, but every sound blurred into drips and echoes. I was terrified of slipping, terrified of getting lost, and terrified of what I would find when I came back with James. Then, after a brief flicker, the lights came back on. The cave returned in pieces. First the path, then the walls, then the railings, then the normal, arranged look of the place, as if nothing had happened at all. I rounded the corner into the larger chamber and saw the rest of the tour group standing together exactly where they should have been. A few people turned to look at me. Their expressions were confused more than alarmed. I must have looked awful. I was breathing hard, my clothes were damp, and I must have had the wild look of someone who had just gone through something far worse than everyone else in the room. "Help," I said, louder this time. Someone slipped. "Over there, in the burial chamber. She needs help." James looked at me, then past me. then at the rest of the group. He actually seemed to count us with his eyes. To this day, I can still see the change in his face, small but unmistakable. The edge of a smile touched it. Not a warm smile, not a shocked smile, just a strange, knowing little grin that made my stomach tighten. "I think," he said, in an easy voice that did not fit the moment at all, "you might be a bit late for that." I stared at him, not understanding. For a second, I honestly thought he was making some dry joke, maybe too used to people messing around during tours. I took a step toward him. "What are you talking about?" I said. "She fell. I just..." He lifted a hand lightly, as if to settle me down, and then turned to the rest of the group. "If you'd all like to follow me," he said, "we'll continue into the next chamber." I remember feeling something close to anger then, real anger. I wanted to grab him by the arm and drag him back, but everyone else simply followed, curious now, glancing at me with uncertain expressions. I followed too, because what else could I do? We walked back into the chamber I had just left, the burial chamber, the place where the lights had gone out and the woman had slipped through my hand. James stopped near the barrier and gestured toward the information board I had been reading. "Yes," he said, with the tone of someone picking up a lesson after a small interruption, as our comedian friend here has just spoiled for you all. "This is the burial chamber, one of the most recently used parts of the cave. A few people gave the sort of uncomfortable half-laugh people produce when they are not sure whether they are supposed to laugh. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him. He went on. "Back in the Stone Age, this chamber appears to have served as a burial site for the local community. Human activity here seems to have ended after some kind of accident. If you look down the bank, you'll see what many archaeologists believe may explain part of that story." I walked toward the barrier as if my legs belonged to someone else. My feet felt cold and weak. Every step seemed wrong. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had felt in my hand. I knew there had been someone there, warm and desperate and alive. But there was the path under electric light, the rail, the sign, the neat tourist setup. All ordinary again. I reached the edge and looked down. At the bottom, beside the narrow stream, lay a skeleton. It had been marked out carefully by archaeologists. Small numbered tags had been placed around it. The bones were partly settled into the earth and stone, as if they had belonged there longer than memory. One leg lay at an unnatural angle. "A young woman," James said from behind us, sounding almost pleased to be delivering a fact he had repeated many times before. Experts believe she broke her leg in the fall and could not climb back up. The remains date to around 11,000 years ago. No one in the group said anything for a moment. A few people leaned in for a better look. Someone whispered, "Wow." Another person raised a phone and took a picture. The stream kept making that soft sound below, moving past the bones as if it had been doing the same thing forever. I could barely hear James continue with his explanation. The words reached me broken and distant. Burial practice, settlement, excavation, end-of-site use. None of it settled in my mind. All I could think about was her hand in mine. I stood there and looked at the skeleton while every part of me tried to find another explanation. Maybe someone from the group had bumped into me and fallen, and in the dark, I had imagined the rest. Maybe the sounds had echoed strangely. Maybe I had grabbed at empty air and panicked. Maybe my hangover, the darkness, the story on the sign, all of it had mixed together and produced some waking nightmare. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not explain away the pressure of her grip, the wetness of her skin, the way she had sobbed below after the fall. Those things felt more real than the barrier now standing safely in front of me. The rest of the tour passed in a blur. James kept talking. The group kept moving. People asked the occasional question. I followed because I had to, but I was no longer really there. I saw shapes, lights, signs, and stone, but none of it meant much. My mind was stuck in that one dark moment, replaying it from every angle. Could I have held on longer? Could I have got down on my stomach and reached farther? Could I have shouted sooner? If I had not pulled her hand away, would I have gone down too? These thoughts came again and again, with no answer. Worse than all of them was the awful possibility that she had not been asking me to save her from death, but to keep her from dying the same way twice. By the time we came back out into daylight, the sun was lower but still bright. I had expected to feel relief at seeing the open air again, but instead I felt exposed, almost unreal, as if part of me were still underground. People drifted off toward the cafe or the gift shop. Some chatted about what they had seen. The Japanese group took photos outside the visitor center. A child asked loudly if there were any ghosts in the cave, and his mother told him not to be silly. James stood near the entrance, ready to receive the next group, looking completely normal. I thought about going over to him and asking whether anything like that had ever happened before. I thought about telling him exactly what I had heard and felt. But one look at his face stopped me. Whether he would have laughed, denied it, or simply given me that same strange smile, I didn't want to find out. I walked back to the hotel slowly, though it was not far. The heat had started to fade, and the evening air should have felt pleasant, but I hardly noticed it. My friends were awake when I got back, looking healthier and asking how the tour had been. One of them was halfway through a packet of crisps. Another had ordered food. They wanted to know if the cave was worth seeing, whether there was anything interesting, whether the guide had been funny, whether I had taken any photos. I stood there for a second, still feeling that cold grip in my palm. Not bad, I said. That was all I gave them. They accepted it and moved on to talking about what to do that night. I was glad. I didn't have the energy to explain, and even if I had tried, I'm not sure how it would have sounded. There are some experiences that become weaker the moment you put them into words, not because they are less true, but because they are too strange to survive ordinary speech. If I had said, I think I tried to save a woman who died 11,000 years ago, they would have laughed, or worse, looked at me with concern. So I kept it to myself. Even now, I have told almost no one. Time has not made it easier to think about. If anything, it has sharpened the worst part of it. I can still picture that chamber. I can still feel the cave's darkness after the lights went out, so complete it seemed to have weight. I can still hear her running in panic, still hear the impact when she fell, still hear the crying from below. And more than anything, I still remember her hand slipping from mine, because I chose to save myself. I do not know what happened in that cave. Maybe it was something impossible. Maybe the place still holds the last fear of that girl the way stone can hold water and cold. Maybe, for one moment, the past and present touched in the dark. Or maybe my mind broke in exactly the right way at exactly the wrong time. I have considered every explanation. None of them sit right. What I know is simple. In a burial chamber in Wales, in a cave used by the dead long before history had words, the lights went out. In that darkness, someone found me. She was terrified. She slipped. I tried to hold on. Then I let go. And at the bottom of that bank, beside the stream, they had already found her bones. Story 5. 8 months ago, if someone had told me that everything I thought I understood about the world was about to shatter into a million pieces, I would have laughed and walked away. I would not have believed a single word of it. I was just a normal girl living a normal life, and the biggest thing on my mind was turning 16 and what kind of cake my mom was going to order. That was it. That was the sum total of my concerns. But that was before the bracelet, before the shuttle, before I learned what we really are. It all started on my birthday. The house was full of people and noise and the smell of food and candles burning on top of a cake that my mother had spent all morning decorating. Everything felt warm and golden and safe. My family was there. Neighbors were there. Friends from school had come by earlier and dropped off gifts wrapped in shiny paper. It was a good day, a really good day. The kind of day where you feel like the whole world is smiling at you and nothing bad could ever touch you. I leaned forward and blew out the candles. Everyone clapped and cheered. But the second I blew them out, something happened. Something small. Something that most people in the room probably did not even notice. The bracelet on my wrist blinked silver. Just once. A quick flash of cold metallic light that was there and gone in the span of a heartbeat. I looked down at it. The bracelet had always been there. Everyone got one at birth. It was just something you wore, like a watch or a ring. Nobody really talked about what it did. Nobody really asked. It was just part of life. But I had never seen it blink before, and I had definitely never seen it glow silver. My father did not flinch. He did not even look at my wrist. He just stood up from his chair and raised his glass high and said to Kira, our leader in the making. His voice was strong and steady, maybe a little too steady. The kind of steady that people force when they are trying very hard not to let something else show through. Applause followed. It was warm, but there was something rehearsed about it, like everyone in the room had been expecting this moment and had already practiced their reactions ahead of time. My mother smiled, but I could see the edges of it trembling. She pulled me in for a hug and held me close, and I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. It was fast, too fast for someone who was supposed to be happy. She whispered into my hair, "You have always had it even before the tests." I did not know what that meant. Not really. I laughed and tried to sound casual and said, "I guess that means no more math homework." Everyone laughed at that. Glasses clinked together. A neighbor called out from across the room and said they are lucky to have you. Someone else murmured something about how you either have the genes or you do not. Then someone else muttered something quieter almost into their wine glass. Silver. Not many go silver. The way they said it made the back of my neck prickle. Like silver was not a good thing. Like silver meant something that nobody wanted to say out loud. I looked around the room for my brother. He was already pushing back from the table. He asked to be excused and left his cake untouched. He did not look at me. He did not say happy birthday. He just walked out of the room, and I heard his bedroom door close softly down the hall. Something about that quiet click felt louder than all the cheering and clinking glasses combined. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was dark, and still my mother came and sat beside me on my bed. She picked up my hairbrush from the nightstand and started brushing my hair the way she used to when I was small. Long, slow strokes from the crown of my head all the way down to the ends. She had not done that in years. I sat there and let her, and neither of us said anything for a long time. The only sound was the soft pull of the brush through my hair and the occasional creak of the house settling around us. Finally, she spoke. "You do not have to be brave," she said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the wall. "Just be steady." Then she put the brush down and hugged me again. She held on for too long. I could feel her hands gripping the back of my shirt like she was trying to memorize the shape of me. When she finally pulled back, I looked up at her face. Her eyes were glassy and red, and her mouth was pressed into a thin, hard line. She did not say another word. Neither did I. She stood up and walked out and closed the door behind her, and I sat there in the dark listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. I did not sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling with the bracelet on my wrist, glowing faintly silver in the darkness, like a tiny cold star that had attached itself to my body. At dawn, the vehicle arrived. I heard it before I saw it, a low, soft hum that vibrated through the walls and made the water in the glass on my nightstand tremble. I went to the window and looked out. It was hovering a few centimeters off the ground in front of our house. No wheels, no markings, no logos or numbers or any indication of where it came from or who it belonged to. Just a matte black oblong shape hanging in the air with that constant low hum pulsing from somewhere deep inside it. A ramp slid out from the bottom without making a single sound. It just extended itself smoothly and touched the ground like a tongue reaching out to taste the pavement. I got dressed. I packed nothing because there was nothing to pack. No one had told me to bring anything. No one had told me anything at all, really. I walked downstairs, and my parents were standing by the front door. My mother hugged me tightly. I could feel her whole body shaking against mine. Then she stepped back and clasped her hands together in front of her, like she was physically holding herself in place. My father nodded once. Just once. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping under his skin. There were no tears, not from either of them, just eyes that would not meet mine. They looked past me. They looked at the floor. They looked at the walls. Anywhere but directly at me. I wanted to ask what was happening. I wanted to ask where I was going and when I would be back and why everyone was acting like this was the last time they would ever see me. But something in their faces told me not to ask. Something told me they could not answer even if they wanted to. I walked across the front yard and up the ramp and into the vehicle. Inside, it was nothing like I expected. The interior was clean and white and curved. Rows of white seats lined the walls in a wide arc. There were no windows anywhere, no controls, no dashboard or steering mechanism or anything that suggested a human being had any say in where this thing was going. Teenagers were already seated along the walls, maybe 15 or 20 of them. They sat in silence with their hands in their laps and their eyes glazed over like they had all been crying for hours and had finally run out of tears. No one looked at me when I entered. No one said hello or asked my name or acknowledged my existence in any way. I moved to an empty spot beside a boy who had a bandage wrapped around his hand. The white gauze was stained with a small spot of rust-colored blood. He did not look up. The door behind me sealed shut with a soft hiss, and just like that, I was cut off from everything I had ever known. No one asked where we were going. I think we all already knew that asking would not change anything. The shuttle flew without any sensation of acceleration. One moment we were still, and the next we were moving, but I could not feel the difference. There was no roar of engines, no rumble of thrust, no feeling of being pushed back into my seat. Just that same low, steady hum that had been there from the beginning. The lights inside dimmed and brightened at random intervals with no pattern or rhythm that I could detect. Sometimes the cabin would go almost completely dark and then slowly brighten again for no apparent reason. Food trays slid out from the walls at irregular times, white paste that had no taste, a small cup of water, a single vitamin pill. That was it. No explanation of what we were eating or why. No mealtimes, no schedule. Just trays appearing and disappearing on their own. The others rarely spoke. I watched them and tried to guess things about them. How smart they were, where they came from, what their bracelets had shown. I studied their faces looking for clues, but found nothing. Some of them just stared blankly at the floor for hours without moving. One girl in the row across from me raked her fingernails across the back of her neck over and over until the skin was raw and red and glistening. She did it slowly and methodically, like she did not even realize she was doing it. Or maybe she did, and it was the only thing keeping her from screaming. Then, without any warning at all, a sudden violent acceleration slammed every one of us back into our seats. It was brutal, an instant. My head snapped back, and my vision blurred, and for a few terrifying seconds, I could not breathe. It reminded me of family vacations to the Belt when I was younger. We used to take trips out past Mars, and the initial acceleration always hit hard. But there was always a countdown, always a warning, always a voice over the intercom telling you to brace yourself. This time, there was nothing. Just silence, and then force. I gripped the edges of my seat and tried to steady myself and noticed the boy next to me. He was wearing a faded superhero shirt that looked like it had been washed 100 times. He was humming something under his breath, a song maybe, or just the melody he had made up to comfort himself. He hummed for a few minutes and then stopped, because the others were staring at him. He went quiet and looked down at his bandaged hand and did not make another sound. There were no clocks anywhere on the shuttle, no announcements, no updates, no voice telling us how long we had been traveling or how much farther we had to go. Just the quiet hum of the engines and the slow drip of anxiety building under my skin like water filling a glass, one drop at a time. I do not know how long we had been flying when I noticed it. One cycle, in whatever passed for day or night in that windowless cabin, I spotted a faint pulse of light behind a corner panel on the wall near my seat. It was soft and green and barely visible, so faint that you would miss it completely if you were not looking right at it. I watched it for a while. It pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I waited until the others were asleep, or at least pretending to be. Then I got up as quietly as I could and crouched beside the panel. I worked my fingers along the edge until I found a seam and pried it open. What I found inside made my stomach drop. It was not wiring. It was not circuitry. Not in any way I recognized. Behind the panel were fibrous strands that looked almost organic. They pulsed faintly with that same green light, and they were warm to the touch. Alive, that was the word that came to mind, even though I did not want it to. They felt alive. At the center of the tangled mass was a small black cube, no bigger than a dice. It had glowing characters on its surface, not English, not any language I had ever seen. I reached out and touched it. The second my fingers made contact, the interface blinked to life. Characters surfaced on the tiny screen, ancient-looking letters that shifted and rearranged themselves. They looked almost like Aramaic or something even older. I used the translator built into my watch and held it over the cube. The translation appeared on my wrist. And the sons of the sky made flesh from clay and named it their seed. I read it twice, 3 times. The words did not make any more sense the third time than they did the first. Then the screen on the cube vanished. The panel sealed itself shut with a soft click, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not pry it open again. The shuttle slowed. I could not see it, but I could feel it. The hum changed. It dropped in pitch and became something more than a sound. It became a sensation that I felt in my teeth and in my bones. The vibration moved through the floor and up through my legs and settled in my chest. Then the door opened. We stepped out into something massive. The space we entered was so enormous that my brain could not process it at first. The ceiling curved upward and disappeared into darkness so far above us that it might as well have been the sky. The walls pulsed with a faint internal light that was not artificial. It was organic, living, the same kind of bioluminescence I had seen behind that panel. The air had a metallic tang to it that coated the back of my throat and made my eyes water. Everything smelled like copper and ozone and something else underneath, something ancient and wet and wrong. I blinked. Once, twice, and then I saw them. They were just there, standing in the enormous space like they had always been there, like they had been waiting for us. They were tall. No, that is not the right word. They were gigantic. They towered above us so high that I had to crane my neck all the way back just to see where their forms ended and the darkness began. They had no faces, no eyes or mouths or noses or anything resembling human features. Just smooth, featureless surfaces where a face should have been. They had multiple limbs that moved independently of each other in slow, deliberate patterns. Their bodies were not made of metal. It was something else, something smoother and drier, something that looked almost like skin but was clearly not skin. They were alive. I knew that immediately and without question. These things were alive. They did not speak, not a word, not a sound. They simply gestured with those long, multi-jointed limbs, and the group began to split. Half of us were directed to the left. The other half were guided to the right. I was in the left group. I watched the others disappear behind a seamless wall that closed behind them without leaving a trace. No door, no seam, no indication that a wall had ever opened there at all. We entered a white chamber. The floor was like glass, perfectly smooth and perfectly clear, and I could see faint shapes moving far below the surface. There were no seams anywhere, no corners, no edges. The room seemed to exist as a single unbroken surface that curved from floor to wall to ceiling without interruption. There was no sound at all, not even the hum. Just absolute silence that pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. Machines moved among us, smooth, dark shapes that glided across the floor without making contact with it. They guided each teenager onto a raised platform. No straps, no restraints, nothing holding us in place except the unspoken understanding that there was nowhere to go. I stepped up onto my platform. It hummed beneath my feet. A different hum, deeper and more resonant than the shuttle. I could feel it vibrating through my bones and into my skull. I looked to my left. A boy on the platform next to mine was shaking so badly that I could hear his teeth chattering. A girl 2 platforms down was whispering a prayer with her eyes squeezed shut and her hands pressed together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Then the far wall turned transparent. On the other side was the other group, the ones who had been directed to the right. But they were not standing. They were not sitting. They were not alive. They were being taken apart. Not executed. Not killed in any quick or merciful way. Deconstructed, that is the only word for it. Black forms that might have been machines moved among them in slow, precise patterns. They moved with a care and delicacy that made the horror of what they were doing somehow worse. Blood misted the air in elegant arcs that caught the light and shimmered like red rain. I saw a brain being severed mid-scream. I saw the face that belonged to Frozen in an expression of pure terror that would never change again. Tissue was lifted delicately from open bodies and examined and sorted and placed into containers that sealed themselves shut. It was methodical, clinical, like watching someone carefully disassemble a clock to study its gears. Except the clock was a person. except the gears were organs and muscle and bone and fear. Nobody in my group made a sound. Not a scream, not a whimper, not a single word. We just stood there on our platforms and watched through that transparent wall, and something inside each of us broke quietly and permanently. I froze. My thoughts barely formed. They started and stopped and crashed into each other like waves hitting rocks. I could not look away. I could not close my eyes. I could not do anything except stand there and witness what was happening to people who had been standing beside me just minutes ago. People who had been breathing and blinking and humming songs under their breath. A voice filled the room. It was not spoken out loud. It did not come from speakers or from any visible source. It was felt. It entered my chest and resonated through my rib cage like someone had reached inside me and plucked a string. The words formed themselves in my mind without passing through my ears. Dina expression at threshold. Structural resolution in progress. I did not fully understand what that meant, but every part of my body understood that it was not good. My platform trembled beneath my feet. I could not move. My legs would not respond. My arms hung at my sides like dead weight. Above me, mechanical arms descended from the ceiling. They unfolded themselves slowly and precisely, and positioned themselves around my body like the legs of an enormous spider preparing to wrap its prey. Then, I heard a whisper beside me. A real whisper. A human voice. Quiet and desperate and shaking with fear. Run, just that one word. Run. I looked over and saw the girl on the platform next to mine staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. My scan flashed amber. The display on my bracelet pulsed with a warm orange light, and characters scrolled across it faster than I could read. The voice in my chest spoke again. Signal fragmented. Retain for live analysis. The mechanical arms above me paused. They froze in place, and red lights flared along their joints. Sirens erupted. A piercing, wailing alarm that filled the chamber and made the glass floor vibrate beneath my feet. The girl beside me leapt from her platform. She jumped and hit the ground running. One of the machines struck. It moved so fast I barely saw it. 1 second she was running, and the next she was on the ground, and then she was not on the ground anymore. She was in the air. She was in pieces. I did not look. I could not look. I ran. I threw myself off the platform and darted through a gap in the wall before it sealed itself shut behind me. Alarms blared from every direction. Red light pulsed through the corridors like a heartbeat. I sprinted through hallways that were slick with fluid. Some of it was clear, and some of it was not. I tried not to look at the floor. I tried not to think about what I was stepping in. Doors hissed open just barely enough for me to squeeze through, and then slammed shut behind me. Machines stirred in cradles along the walls, reaching for me with limbs that unfolded from hidden compartments. I dodged and ducked and kept running. I found a hatch in the floor. I did not think. I just dropped through it and fell into black. The tunnel I landed in pulsed. The walls were slick and warm and soft, like flesh, like the inside of something alive. I crawled as fast as I could on my hands and knees. The bracelet on my wrist flickered, silver then dark, like a dying signal, like a fading heartbeat. I did not stop. I could hear sounds behind me, mechanical sounds, clicking and whirring, and the soft, wet sound of something moving through the tunnel after me. I crawled faster. My knees were raw and my palms were slick with whatever coated the walls, and my breath came in ragged gasps that echoed off the fleshy surface around me. Ahead of me, I saw blue light, just a faint glow at the end of the tunnel. I crawled toward it with everything I had. The tunnel opened into a hollow chamber. It was smaller than the spaces I had been in before. The air was stale and heavy with the smell of rust and rot. The blue light came from clusters of bioluminescent growths on the walls that pulsed weakly like they were running out of energy. In the center of the chamber, crouched in a nest of tangled wires and pulsing organic roots, was a person, or what was left of a person. Half his face was fused with circuitry. Wires and cables ran under his skin and emerged at odd angles. Metal plates covered portions of his skull and jaw. One of his eyes was milky white, and it moved on its own, spinning slowly in its socket, like it was searching for something that was not there. The other eye was sharp and clear and aware. It locked onto me the moment I entered the chamber. He was thin. Emaciated, his body was a patchwork of flesh and technology that had grown together in ways that did not look planned. He looked like something that had been started and never finished, like a rough draft of a person that had been abandoned halfway through. I froze in the entrance of the chamber. "Who are you?" I said. My voice came out as barely a whisper. He moved awkwardly. His limbs did not all agree on which direction to go. Some of them twitched and jerked while others moved smoothly. He shifted in his nest of wires and looked at me with that one clear eye. "I was in the first wave," he said. His voice was rough and dry, like it had not been used in a very long time, when the awakenings began. "They tried to rebuild through us, but I broke. The code did not take, so I hid." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "The machines," I said. "What are they doing up there?" He laughed. It was a brittle sound, like dry branches snapping. "Not machines," he said. "Well, not what we would call machines, more like pieces of them. Left after the impact, when the sky burned and the oceans boiled." "An asteroid," I whispered. He nodded slowly. His milky eye spun and then stopped. "They ruled this planet once," he said. "Long before us. Long before anything we would recognize as life. They saw the end coming. They knew the asteroid was going to hit, and they knew they could not stop it. So they did the only thing they could. They embedded themselves into the only thing that would survive, into Dina, into the building blocks of life itself. They hid inside us, inside our genetic code. Then they waited. They let the Earth recover. They let millions of years pass. They let us evolve and grow and build. They let us develop language and culture and technology. They let us create everything they would need. And the whole time they were inside us, sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor of the chamber. "We were the incubation," I whispered. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Exactly," he said. He pointed one trembling, half-mechanical finger at my bracelet. "That signal. It is not just a scan. It is not just measuring your Dina or checking your health. It is a recall. You hit the threshold. Your species matured enough, connected enough, powerful enough. You are of age. That is what the silver means. The silver means you are ready. The silver means whatever is sleeping inside your Dina has reached the point where it can wake up." A pulse rocked the chamber. The walls shook and dust rained down from above. The bioluminescent growths flickered and dimmed. The pulse was distant, but approaching, getting closer, getting stronger. "They do not need ships," he said. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "They do not need technology of their own. You built everything they need: satellites, servers, energy grids, fiber optic cables spanning the entire globe, the cloud, all of it. Every piece of technology humanity has ever created was not created by accident. It was guided, pushed, nudged in the right direction by something buried so deep in our Dina that we never even knew it was there. Your cloud will be their nervous system. Your power grids will be their circulatory system. Your satellites will be their eyes and ears. Everything we built, thinking it was for us, was actually for them." I stared at him. My whole body was shaking. I could feel tears running down my face, but I did not remember starting to cry. "How are you even alive down here?" I asked. My voice cracked. "Why are you telling me all this? If you know what they are and what they are doing, why are you just hiding here? Why have you not tried to stop them? Why have you not tried to warn someone?" He looked away from me. That one clear eye shifted to the wall, and something in it changed. The sharpness dulled. The awareness dimmed. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought maybe he had shut down. Maybe whatever was left of his brain had finally given up. Then he spoke. His voice was barely audible. "Because they let me live," he said, "as long as I help catch the ones who run." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered backward. The chamber seemed to tilt and spin around me. I looked at him, and he looked back at me, and in that one clear eye, I saw something that might have been regret or might have been relief. The walls behind me split open. They peeled apart like skin being pulled from muscle. Metal limbs snapped out from the darkness behind them. They were long and jointed, and they moved with that same terrible precision I had seen in the white chamber. They reached for me like hungry jaws opening wide. The sound they made was a grinding mechanical shriek that filled the chamber and drowned out the alarms and drowned out my heartbeat and drowned out everything. I did not even have time to scream.